has been working on lately. I am just one of many people that have worked on this, and you guys just get to put up with me as I present all that hard work from those other folks. So, the topic of the connection between grassland health and human well-being, that's a really big one. And fortunately, we've been working on a project that's just starting to scratch the surface on the connection between those two things. So I'm going to present a little bit of that data today, and just know that this is like the 10,000 foot view, and we're hoping that there'll be a lot of other research, not only from our lab, but other folks in this area that are going to connect these two things, because this is a really important topic as we go and talk with a lot of farmers and ranchers and understand the value of our grasslands. How is that helping or connecting to our civilization and communities in these rural areas? So the project I will be talking mostly about is our 1,000 Farms project here. And just to give you a bit of a background on what that is, this project has been going since 2022. And we've visited over 1,700 farms and ranches and orchards across the country since that time. And you can see kind of where we've all been with that. And I'm showing you this not to say, hey, look what all the work we've done. I'm showing you this because that represents a lot of replication in this study. And that's really important, because how many folks have been on YouTube and heard, oh, I'm managing my cattle this way, and it's producing these fantastic results. And you go to a conference, or you're talking to somebody, you're excited about that video you saw, and they say, oh, that's so-and-so, that works for them, but that'll never work for me, that or the other reason. All right, there's always excuses. So this project was designed to see and really test those anecdotal evidence that we were seeing online, to see how management was affecting the outcomes of these agroecosystems. And today's data I'll be presenting is specifically from stuff on rangeland or grazing ecosystems from 2022 to 2024. We had about 300 or so replicates in that time frame. There we go. And to give you an idea, I said we're interested in how management is affecting the health of those grassland ecosystems or grazing ecosystems. And so what I'll be talking about today is regenerative versus conventional. But that regenerative side of things, you can call it whatever there's a lot of labels out there. You can call it AMP grazing, holistic, conservation, rangeland management, whatever you want to call it. This is how we actually put people into that group. We looked at their stock density, the frequency of rotation of their herds, the recovery period of those paddocks after they moved their herds out of those paddocks, and then we looked at their pesticide applications to the livestock that they are managing. And what we found was, on the regenerative side, they tended to have high stock densities, frequent rotations of herds, long recovery periods for the plants, and they used little to no pesticides on those livestock animals. Versus the conventional side was more of our continuous kind of grazing systems, where low stock density, they're kind of left out there from the beginning of the grazing season to the end. And they usually use multiple applications of some sort of pesticides to control mites and parasites and that sort of thing. And then we had everybody, we had a lot of people in the middle. So this represents a spectrum of management styles that were incorporated into this data set. And what did we measure? How do you measure the health of an ecosystem? We had to look at a lot of things, everything from micronutrients down to about 2 feet in the soil column, to the soil microbial community, insects, birds, water infiltration rates, what am I missing there? Plants, and soil microbes. So I had a great crew of people that helped me do a lot of this work. And to summarize this whole thing, we don't have enough time to go into the minutia of all that data, but in order to help to understand, was that management having an effect on the health of those grazing ecosystems, those grassland ecosystems that we were measuring it in? One thing I think that does the best job of highlighting this is this graph right here. So in the center of this spider graph are the folks that represented that continuous grazing system, the folks that were on the far left side, the conventional people, in terms of their management of livestock on the grasslands. So that's the dead center bullseye of this graph. all those data points you see on the outside is the average of the people that were managing in a regenerative style. So the far right side of that graph, the regenerative style folks. And what's that showing is this is the percent increase of bird species richness, bird abundance, insect species richness, insect abundance, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, all these hosts of soil microbes, as well as living cover of the soil from plants and plant biomass. So what this is showing, it's painting this picture of as you move from a conventional style of management of your livestock and your grasslands to a regenerative style, you have this increasing general biodiversity in those grazing systems from all these different metrics that we kind of measured. And we're not going to have enough time to get into the soil health aspect of it today. But I wanted to highlight, biodiversity because it's so important. Biodiversity provides so much resilience in our grassland ecosystems. The more diversity of species you have out there, the more niches you have fulfilled, the more jobs they can perform for you out there. And jobs, when biology performs jobs for you, it can be quite a powerful thing. So what this represents is when you're managing a regenerative style, you get this benefit of biodiversity, you get this healthy grassland ecosystem. And what
9.
in terms of that connection for human well-being. So I wanted to highlight one story real quick. What is that biodiversity worth, in terms of dollars? And I wanted to look at the dollars and cents of that and just look at this one little story that came out of some of our research at the lab, because biodiversity actually is quite ecosystem services for farmers and ranchers out there. So we're going to step out of the 1,000 Farm study real quick just for this story and look at this study I did looking at the dung arthropod community, North and South Dakota and Minnesota real quick. And when I was out there looking at the dung arthropod community, we noticed something really interesting happening we had regenerative and we had our conventional treatments or management styles. We noticed there's a big difference in terms of really how much cow crap was sitting on those pastures. Now these 4 graphs here, this top graph is, I asked my technicians to actually go out and count the number of dung pats on these pastures and actually measure how big they were for me. And they kind of gave me a strange look, and I said, this will be a cool study, just wait. So I'm sorry to also, I'll apologize. I'm going to have a lot of graphs. I'm a scientist, and I'm addicted to graphs, so you guys are going to have to stick with me here right after lunch. But what this is showing is our regenerative ones, our pastures. I counted the cow pats. These are the ones in black. And you notice in each year we measured this, in 2019 and 2020, the number of cow pats and the area that those cow pats were covering decreased as the grazing season went on, while in our conventional pastures it tended to increase, and quite significantly so. There's a big difference between those two things. So we were seeing this, there was just less cow crap covering the grasslands. And so I asked an economist, what's the value of this? So Scott Fausti, former SDSU faculty, now he's at Cal State Monterey Bay, he helped me calculate what the value of the area of cow dung covering pastures is. And what he found was there's a significance in terms of just land value that's being covered by dung, and also like the rental value. And when I calculated the average size ranch in our study was about 2,000 acres, the land value that dung was covering, the difference was about $96,000. Or each year, it was about $2,400 annually in rental area that you are losing. That's the difference in just from your management style. And I don't know about you guys, but in terms of, you might be wondering, how does this connect to human well-being? But I have a lot less anxiety when I have more money in my bank account. So this is kind of showing how biodiversity can actually affect your bank account and your bottom line. And to dig a little bit deeper, we also measured the plant biomass on these pastures and compared the regenerative to the conventional ones. Because if you have dung that's disappearing quicker on our regenerative ones, it only makes sense that it might be cycling those nutrients better and growing more grass for you. So we measured the the plant biomass. And I did some quick calculations on this. Sorry, I keep walking too far away from the computer. Looking at what the carrying capacity could potentially be from the average size ranches that participated in our study. It may not look like a lot of difference in AUMs, but I figured, I always like to think long term. Over the course of my ranching career, that could add up to, for our participants, roughly 990 extra animal units that they could sell at the end of the year over the course of their careers. That could be quite significant. And then the last little bit on this is I actually looked at the parasites in these dung that were supposed to be being cycled into the soil and being consumed by our dung arthropod community. And there is no, actually, what I want you to note is there's really no difference between the regenerative and the conventional in terms of parasite loads in the dung. And both treatments, livestock treatments, had very low levels of parasite loads. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, not what I expected, but interesting nonetheless. But when we surveyed the ranchers that participated in this study, we asked them, well, what were they doing to control those parasites in their herds? What did it cost you to keep those low levels? And there was quite a difference. There was about a 9-fold difference in terms of their cost per head between our conventional and our regenerative ranchers that participated in our study. So I said, again, over a 30-year career, that's about $36,000 difference for those two treatment groups. They also reported their veterinary costs. There's about a 3.5-fold difference between the two treatments, conventional and regenerative. That's about $188,000 difference over 30 years. I will note, I actually threw out one big outlier from this conventional group because it was just astronomically big, and after talking to him, I figured out why he had it so high. So it was supposed to be $33. But regardless, this highlights, just looking at the dung arthropod community and cycling of dung pats and what that biodiversity is actually worth. So healthy grassland ecosystem can actually equate to better economics for your ranch. And to me, that makes me a lot less anxious when I have more money in my bank account. So now we're going to jump out of the dung, and we're going to get back into the 1,000 farms experiment here. So I said, we were on 300 some ranches, or grazing systems the last few years, and I showed you what that meant in terms of biodiversity, how their management affected the biodiversity or health of those grazing systems. We did some survey work with those participants, and we've asked them a few things about, what motivated you what motivates your management decisions? What motivates you to graze in a regenerative style or graze in whatever style it is that you feel fits your operation the best? And the conventional, the ones that were on that left side of that scale that I showed earlier, represented in the light gray bars here, they disproportionately were motivated by financial decisions and legacy and kind of like future and past generation legacies. I come from a farming and ranching family down in Iowa, and I can certainly speak to, there's that pressure when you take over the farm or ranch of, great-great-grandpa and grandma settled here in 1880 whatever. I can't be the one to screw this up. I got to pass the torch on to the next generation. And that's exactly what a lot of our conventional producers were telling us, disproportionately more than the regenerative ones. They felt that, that was driving their decision-making process. Whereas our regenerative ranchers told us what motivated their decisions was soil health and this mental and physical health of your family. Those two things are what really is driving their decision-making and motivating their decision-making on their lands. So it was interesting. There's this kind of cultural shift from the conventional to the regenerative side of folks in terms of what motivates their decision-making and why they went there. So what does that mean for the well-being of the folks that are living and working on those places? So we asked them a host of questions about chronic conditions that they personally or their immediate family were experiencing. And what this graph is showing here, this dotted line, that is kind of the conventional responses, and these kind of whisker-looking things here, these dark lines that go horizontal, that is the deviation of the regenerative side of folks. We asked them a whole host of things. These are just a select few that they answered enough of to actually have confidence in the results. So we had migraines, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, cancer, allergies, depression, and anxiety. And I presented all of these. You'll notice, first off, almost all of them are non-statistically significant with the exception of anxiety here. But I presented all of them here today because with the exception of migraines, almost all of the remaining ones for the regenerative ones are actually declining compared to their conventional counterparts. So there's this general trend of less self-reported chronic diseases happening in our regenerative folks. And anxiety is actually statistically significantly. So I'll be interested when we get to add 2025 data set to this to see what actually shifts on this line. We might get a little less variance in some of these that are kind of close and actually able to say something. But in a general trend, you can see there's this less kind of anxiety for the folks that are managing those regenerative ones, statistically anxiety for them. So we've seen that, there's this general health of the grassland ecosystems for our regenerative management that seems to increase it. We've now seen, that biodiversity can have economic returns for the folks that are managing that way. And they seem to have a little bit less anxiety ranching that way. So the last component that we got to look at was, well, what about the products of the meat that they're producing for their communities? We wanted to examine the nutritional value of what was coming off those lands. And this data is just coming out now. We actually don't have a comparison between conventional and regenerative on this yet because we just got the results back. But I can say we have everybody that participated in this study. The animals were all grass finished and were raised from birth to death on the farms. And they were all fed grass the entire time. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about what that grass finishing meant in terms of the nutritional value for those people that were producing that. You can see that it was a good source of phosphorus and iron, and I'm not a nutritionist, so I had to ask the nutrition lab what the heck that meant actually. So phosphorus is required for DNA synthesis, cell metabolism, and support iron is also crucial for carrying oxygen and red blood cells around the body and assists in converting food to energy. And then we also see that our grass-finished beef was rich in B3, zinc, and selenium, and had a really low omega-6 to 3 ratio in there. And the nutrition lab did, provide for us what that meant having a low omega-6 to 3 ratio. Here, you could see USDA beef ribeyes that they took off the local grocery store. And it has an omega-6 to 3 ratio of about 13 to 2. That's quite high compared to the beef sample shown here at the top. Ignore that middle bar, that's the bison ribeyes. And there's only about 4 samples of those. I'm not really confident in that yet, but the nutrition lab sent me the whole docket of results. But you could see the difference in omega-6 to omega-3 between the grass-finished beef and the store-bought USDA beef. And so that has there's people that have alluded to how that lower omega-6 to omega-3 ratio has a whole host of health benefits. Go on to the internet and research the benefits of that yourself, as I'm not a nutritionist. But what this kind of illustrates is how there's this connection between taking care of your grasslands. It leads to a cultural shift in a lot of our participants that are interested in increasing biodiversity on those grasslands. That biodiversity has an economic return in terms of the ecosystem services that those organisms can provide, and it has a shift in the motivations and the well-being of the people that are managing those grasslands, and it can even lead to a healthy meat product or product for the community that they are selling to. So that's the whole gambit of that project. There's a lot more details that we don't have time for, so I'll be around if you guys have any questions, or maybe there's time for a question right now.
Yeah, we would have time for a couple of questions, or one or two, if anyone has a question right away.
Seemed kind of curious, the difference of the migraines versus the other problems.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on that matter?
Why the migraines were a little bit higher versus the other ones? I really don't. I'm not a sociologist, and I would, before I venture any wild guesses, I don't know. I will note that there wasn't any statistical difference technically between all of those, yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. You commented early on various ways to describe these operations, but one of the things that's always been tricky about studying this sort of thing is there's a ton of variables, right? And you're well aware of that.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how you plan to, or why you weren't able to or didn't tease apart some of those pieces of management, whether it was the rotation or the pesticides or whatever, to look for what was actually driving those?
Yeah, so great question. So on that spectrum, we have a bunch of people in the middle, and it takes a lot of replication because that variability, as you noted, we have to account for things like different soil textures, different annual moisture rates. And so it sounds like we have a lot of replication in there, but when you drill down to 300 sites spread across the country, when we're trying to control for those other factors that we know are going to add to that variability, it really tightens that up. So we don't really have, or we haven't had time to look for what specifically might be driving that. And we haven't spent a lot of time on that yet, because what we've noted from talking to folks is really it's a system level thing. And you can increase your stock densities, but if you don't adjust the rotation frequency of those herds, it leads to a big problem. So they tend to come together in this whole combination of gambit of things. But yes, yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you for the presentation. In this general body of research, isn't it true that you have found that these regenerative practices are stackable, so you don't have to do an all or nothing event, and you can do what works for your operation and build on it? And I thought maybe you could address that point.
Yes, yeah, good point. So I didn't have time today to present that, but what we have seen as people start stacking more of these kinds of things, the correlation line, there's a bit of a correlation in terms of their positive outcomes. So that's why you gotta adjust for what's appropriate for your operation, your resources, your time, all that stuff. Yes, yeah, and that has to adjust within season and between seasons for folks. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Ryan has also joined
Feel
us
free to pick out a hat and a
couple
mug.
years now for the grazing school that we hold in the eastern part of South Dakota. So he's always a wealth of information around
that just goes
pasture and dung arthropods there. So
Okay.